Hello and welcome to Studying for FRCS. This is Sai from the Mindful Learner, and after a very bad nasty COVID infection which has left my chest quite weak, I'm now back and trying to get back to producing more content with you guys. So today we will tackle the academic Viva section, as I recently received a question about how to get ready for the academic Viva. So this is my take on it and some tips and tricks that I have used to prepare for the Viva. If you like this channel and find the content useful, please subscribe and like, as that will help the YouTube gods to promote my channel and find other like-minded people who are looking to prepare for their exams. As you know, Studying for FRCS is also a podcast, and you can access it in all the major platforms. So what is academic Viva? In academic Viva, it is measured, basically, the components are how to read a journal paper. Can the examinee read the journal paper? How to critique a journal paper? Can you understand the basic statistics used in a journal paper? Can you weigh up the evidence that is provided? That is, understand whether the authors are actually have done sufficiently to produce or to back up the results they have published. And can practice evidence-based medicine or not. That is the other thing that you will be tested on. The FRCS General Surgery Viva gives you 30 minutes to read a paper. So you'll be taken to a room along with some other examinees. You'll give a chair and a table and some papers, pencils, and sometimes markers. You'll be given a printed page of paper, and you'll be given 30 minutes to read a paper, and you'll be and to summarize and make notes. You will be able to take the paper and your notes to the examination room. So those are for you to keep. Then you will be taken to the examination board, where you will have two examiners, and you will have 15 minutes to present, where you summarize the paper, you critique the paper, and you answer some basic statistic questions. And on describing the paper, basically, like I said, you will have a summarization, you will be presenting the paper, and they will ask you nitty-gritty questions about what do you think about these components or not, and how would you manage it and stuff like that. And then when you critique the paper, you will have to also point out the follies, the biases, and what you have found was right or wrong. At the end, they will ask you some basic statistic questions. Now, this paper or this section is not to see whether you are a statistician or not. The surgeons who are there are also not statisticians. So it is simply to for them to assess that whether you can understand simple statistics like sensitivity and specificity, and whether you can basically read an evidence and weigh it up and use it in your own practice or not. So it is really as basic as that. So that's the first thing. You don't need to know shitloads of statistics. Now, what are the materials that you can study? Now, there is a Doctor's Guide to Critical Appraisal, which is a very thorough book. It is good, and I did use it for a bit. However, my brain, when it comes to statistics, is like a sieve. Every time I study them, it just sieves through. I do not know why. I cannot seem to retain them that well. But this is a good, book to practice, I will say, or to get some knowledge. You can practice with journals. You can also start reading journals, because that's the only thing that is going to actually make a difference. The common journals that they use are BJS, European journals, and Annals of Surgery, colorectal disease. Those are the journals they use, among many other. Now, you will not be given a specialty paper of your specialty. So you can be given any paper. So it might be that you have to talk about a paper or a technique that you have no idea. So remember, this is not a knowledge testing session, but this is to see how you can read and critique the paper. There are some webinars and podcasts. So Cram Surge is something I have used. It has actually a very detailed podcast. It's from a Yorkshire deanery, and it's actually to explain to you about various statistics and how to do research and everything, and it is very thorough. It's a bit too thorough, I think, the knowledge section for the exam, I would say, for what this exam is trying to do. But if you are academically inclined, I think this is a good podcast for you. And this also has a YouTube channel. And of course, the podcasts available are Behind the Knife, which has some high yield sessions about statistics, which is helpful. And of course, Studying for FRCS, which has its own season about the basic definitions in statistics. I even have a commuter-friendly statistics high yield sessions where I discuss about the most common questions that they ask in the exams, basically. So these are the materials that I personally used for my exam. Now, when it comes to preparing for FRCS, the problems are multifold. And for me, it is, I can't remember statistics. How do I criticize something I can't understand? I don't feel like I'm clever enough to be one of those academics to, critique a paper and to write down the nitty-gritty. What do all of those graphs mean? And I'm not alone, as by the many responses I had. So this often makes us similar to the appearance of don't want to read it, don't want to tackle it, don't want to touch it. And therefore, but it is a part of the exam. So what do you do about it? So the question that I had from one of my other colleagues, that is that, do I need to study stats? So for part 1, maybe you will get about 4 or 5 questions of stats. And for part 1, actually, I will say you might get away without studying, but then you are letting go of 5 questions, 5 marks, basically. And I find that, if you practice the ones that are already in the question session, most of the stats that I found in my examination were actually from those question sessions. So I think it's, practice the ones that you develop, that you get in your question sessions, I will say. For part 2, the question is that how much of statistics do you need to know? That was the question one of my other listeners asked. And for part 2, you definitely need to study stats and you definitely need to practice paper. Now, that is my opinion. There are 2 schools of thought in this. So I know someone who did not study stats at all, who did not study this section, and he went to the examination, went to this academic section, prepared mentally to fail in that section. And his point was that I can't remember statistics, I won't waste my time with it, I will play to my strength, and I will score 7 and 8s in other sections. So when his marking came, he actually, he failed in his academic, but he passed in the other sections. But because he failed in the academic, he has to get a lot more 7 and 8s. He had to get a lot more 7 and 8s on the other station, which is, like I said, it depends on yourself, what type of person you are. Because I think mentally it's a lot more strain, isn't it? You are going to a station, you know that one block, which is 1/6 of your academic Viva session, you're going to fail. And that puts extra pressure on you to get higher marks on the other sessions. So for me, I thought about it, but I didn't think I can do it. So if you compare that to myself, so I being the other, on the other spectrum, that I did study statistics. So I prepared for my FRCS part 2 after my part 1. So it is 3 months time. And within 3 months, I would say 2 months, I will say, is the time I studied, because of course we all have full-time jobs, other life obligations. And among those 2 months, if I really have to subjectively say, I think I studied statistics for 1 day. By 1 day, I mean for 18 hours. So that will be the cumulative amount of the time I study statistics, roughly about 12 to 18 hours, which is our normal waking time. And I passed my academic session, and I won't say I still understand or know statistics very, very well, but I actually now am able to read and write, understand, and talk about a paper in a fairly short amount of time. And I passed my academic session with good marks, and I passed all my sessions. So when I left my academic Viva session, I knew I passed, or at least, I had a good chance of pass. And I actually passed quite well. I actually got way above than I would have expected. So my point is, it is an easy station to get marks on. People are scared of it, and I am one of them. But actually, there are 90% of time you'll get a fixed set of questions. So it is really an easy station for you to get 7s and 8s, I will say. So if you can get 7s and 8, the other clinical sessions, yes, which we practice a lot, but we don't know exactly what questions we will have. While in this academic station, we will actually probably, from all my research and everything, 90% of time, you are asked a set group of questions, basically. So this is actually an easy session to score some marks. So why will I not do that? You need to score 600. So that means you need to score 6 in all of the stations. And if you, so that's a pass, but 7 is a good pass and 8 is top of the boards. So ideally you want to aim at 7 for every station you can try to get, isn't it? But you won't get 7 and you won't get 8. So some stations you might even fail. So this can compensate or buffer the other station, I will say. So the academic Viva has these components. So there are 3 components in academic Viva, which I broke down and which I practiced on. So number 1 is, of course, reading. Again, reading is important, and I've already described how to read the paper and how to produce it. And this has a set type of setting. There are various type of settings. Basically, each person has their own ways of reading a paper. All you need to do is develop your own system. Next is critiquing. That's the hardest part, but again, it's actually a very learnable skill. So you have to critique the paper, you have to nitpick it, and say whether it's a paper you suggest, whether it's I won't never ever say good or bad paper. Basically, paper, you're there to say that, whether this paper is something that will change your practice or not, and whether you find the paper useful or whether you agree with that paper. Do not ever be disrespectful to the authors of the paper, because you do not know who's on the examination. It might be the author might be sitting there and you are just, shredding his paper. So unlikely, you will pass that exam, because remember, we're all humans. And of course, next, the thing that you can work on is your presentation. And I feel like this is something when most of us do not put enough effort on, because this examination, as any examination, it's just like an interview. It's all about presentation. So if you practice these 3, and if you break it down and you practice each section, then you have a good chance, I will say. You give yourself a good chance to pass. Now, how to read a paper? Again, like I mentioned, you develop a system of your own and you practice with a timer. You will have 30 minutes, you take 30 minutes timer and you practice reading the paper, and you stop. You literally stopped at the time. And so a lot of people actually did ask me, how did I read a paper? And there are lots of systems. So I would make a separate video regarding what was my system and how did I summarize and what was the way I summarized, because that's the other thing. You read the paper, but now you need to practice summarizing. So develop your own system, practice with a timer, and practice summarizing. So I would describe my system, which works for me. It might not work for you, in the next episode of how to read a paper for FRCS. But this is only for dummies like me. If you have any knowledge about, statistics, please, this is not for you. This is only for dummies like me. All right. So keep an eye out for that next episode. So next comes critiquing. Now, critique have a system. My system was, I mentioned the good points first. I've always started with a positive. It's like giving a feedback. I started with, okay, what did I like about the paper? What did the authors did right? What was that? Then I move on limitation, like the authors did not do this. And in every paper, the authors will mention their own limitations. And so I will put down that the authors mentioned these limitations, but also these are the extra limitations that I found. You will also need to critique the paper to identify any biases that you have noticed, like what kind of bias, whether there is randomization bias, selection bias. So how can they impact these, the journal findings? And the next question that they will eventually ask you is, what would you do differently? So whatever you're saying that, oh, this is wrong, just be prepared that they are going to ask you, well, then how would you have done it differently? So be prepared, whatever you say that I don't think that they did it right, to have an answer about what would you have done differently. And would it change your practice? Now, this is the most important question. It can be either yes or no. And whatever it is, just have an answer to defend yourself, defend the answer with it. And of course, be respectful to the examiners, to the authors. You are there as an impartial observer. Your idea is, I will be there as an impartial observer of the paper, critiquing the paper. So always be respectful to the authors and to the examiners. Now, how do you practice presentation? Now, as I mentioned, you need a paper and you'll need a pencil, because that is what you get in real life. Now, how I practiced is, number one, journals. Now, common journals are BJ's journal, annals sometimes also come in the exams, and I am colorectal, so I have colorectal journals. So I took a paper and practiced with them. You can also contact your librarian, but try to practice recent paper that are published within 6 months of the examination, so that, or 1 year, so that, you give your, just off chance that you have read this paper, or you can even get this paper. Very rarely you will, but this just helps you to know things, basically. Keep 2 markers, so 1 yellow marker and 1 orange marker. And like I said, practice marking the good points with yellow, or the points of question, the critiquing points with orange. That way your brain will automatically identify them when you are summarizing. In the pen and paper, what I used is that I would write first of all the summary, or the summary point. Then I will make a column with good points and bad points. So then I will just refer back to the yellow and orange points to write it in those columns about the good points and bad points that I will critique. Practice with a timer. So I practice with a 30-minute timer. I also did it because I thought it will be, usually the rooms are very quiet. Like I said, they take you to a room, but you can listen to other sounds outside. So what I did is I listened to YouTube, like 30-minute noisy room timer, while I listen practicing the paper. It's basically just to get your mind practice to focus while there are distractions going on. And then the last thing that I did was I recorded myself, and or I presented myself to the mirror. And you can do that also to one of your consultants, to one of your colleagues. That will also be helpful, but that's what I did. And then I saw that how was I pronouncing, what was my body language like, was I sitting up, how was I talking, and then I could modify and be more mindful of them. So now, again, yes, you will say that, okay, I've done that, but how do I know my practice is actually very good? And you can do multiple things. You can join your own journal club and you can present them, and that's a very good practice, I would say. In fact, if you are a junior, if you have 1 year or something like that, I would suggest now to practicing journal clubs, because that will give you a very good practice. You can practice with your consultants. You can practice with them to see how you are preparing. And again, it doesn't have to be right or wrong. It is just for you to practice, to verbalize your comments. And you can also practice with your study buddy. So if you have a person that you know are a bit more academically oriented or have done their PhDs or whatever, you can practice with them. But if not, you can also practice with your consultants. They had to go through it also, so they will remember, they will at least be able to critique your presentation style. So that's important. The things that I used, because for my self-critiquing, are 2 YouTube resources. One is Cram Search. So they have this journal club thing where they will read a paper every, I think, month or something like that, and then they will critique it. So I would choose that paper. I would first practice critiquing it by myself, summarizing and practicing it by myself, and then I will see the YouTube video regarding what was the differences or what was the additional points that they mentioned during their critiquing. And that would, it's just to get your mind to identify those points, basically. And last of all, also you can use Behind the Knife. They have a lot of journals in their podcast and in their videos. And I think that's a very good resource also. Again, you can use that as your reference, that whether, what you're practicing is right or wrong. And this will give you some sort of benchmark. Now, the stats. That is the worst thing for me. I can remember sensitivity and specificity, but to remember type 1 error, type 2 error, it is a nightmare. So again, you don't have to memorize the definitions verbatim, basically word by word. You just have to understand the concept. And if you can explain the concept to the examiners, that's all they're looking for. You don't have to mention the definitions. So you need to develop a system to remember them. Now, when you come to the memorizing and to the developing a system, my own system, I am currently in the process of summarizing all of them to this ebook, which I hope to make it shortly available. But again, like I said, it is for dummies and only dummies only, and written by a dummy like myself. So if you are one like myself, then please read it, and this might be useful to you. This summary is the ones that I used to remember things for myself, and also how will I explain that to the examiner. And I actually went through this the day before my exam to one of my other colleagues, because we were practicing basic statistics, basically. And we practiced for 1 hour, and I was explaining him, okay, the correlation means that, with examples. And he was like, you know what? You actually make more sense to me than what I did so far in getting papers. So I think that was a very positive feedback. So I'm trying to summarize it. So when it is, I will let you guys know. But if you are interested, please contact me through the social media channels about this. So this is my summary about the academic paper session, basically. If you find this useful, please like and subscribe. And please also leave any feedback you have in the comment section. I love listening from you guys. It is a great it's a great boon, basically, and also any constructive feedback. I'm always there to listen. We do have a public page now in the Facebook, and I'm very active. Studying for FRCS is very active in the Instagram. And of course, you have our podcast. So there are multiple ways for you to connect. Please connect so that we can build a big community of studying for FRCS, of people who are doing that, and we can all help each other so that we can all pass the exam. So thank you for listening and seeing, and see you next time.